Following UFC 308 this past Saturday, Dana White gave one of the most cope-filled and bashful interviews full of gaslighting Francis Ngannou, and it was honestly complete crap. When you listen to a lot of things that he was saying, it was pure emotion and negativity that just comes from his personal disdain for Francis and losing the contract battle, which saw Francis have great success making bank outside of the UFC. And Dana is still not over it. Francis hasn't fought in the UFC for 2 years, but it may as well have been 2 weeks ago because Dana White can't deal with this L that Francis Ngannou threw in his face. We're going to go over a lot of clips from Dana's interview, as well as what Francis Ngannou said leading up to it, which caused Dana's emotional outburst. And I'm also going to disprove a lot of what Dana White had said about Francis Ngannou. So we're going to jump into the first clip, and it's going to be exactly what happened with Ngannou. Now, this clip was following Dana White being pretty bashful of Francis Ngannou, who recently won in PFL. It was a post-power slap press conference where Dana went off on him and essentially discredited everything Ngannou has done outside of the UFC and continues to harp on that he'll make more money if he would have stuck with us. But regardless, let's watch this Ngannou clip.
Dana have lost this in this situation, and the only thing is that he can't understand it. Like, bro, I won everything. I left. It's been what, almost 2 years, and the guy is still out there. He can't live without it. I went out there, did a fight, have a great fight for my son memory, but the guy can't stand. I don't know.
He does have a deep-rooted issue with Ngannou, and it all comes from losing in business. And it dates back to while Francis was still in the UFC. This wasn't just following the end of contract between the two. This was following the lead up to this Cyril Gane fight, and I'm sure moments before, where Francis Ngannou kind of made waves looking for potentially more compensation for himself as well as for his opponents and just UFC fighters in general. I think that he tried to push past what most UFC fighters would ever consider asking for. Not just for himself, I'm talking about for what the company is doing for the fighter. In a sense, he was the leader of fighter pay talk and pushing for better deals for fighters and, different opportunities for them, like to potentially do boxing, himself wanting to go into boxing. And the UFC's like, hell no, let's keep playing Francis. But I had to quickly add that in.
Know what is his problem, man, and he can make everything up like as he want. That is problem. I think he needs to make a peace with himself. You could have just said we didn't find a agreement or something, and we continue our life. What's the problem here? He can handle this loss.
He can't handle this loss, and you'll see when we react to Dana White's clip, those words got under his skin like none else. He absolutely lost it. Let's keep playing Francis.
I'm sure you've been praying for my downfall, and then I'm just keep doing my thing, rising, since I left the UFC. And which money he's talking about? The money that he owes me. They say, oh, we're going to back pay you from the money that we owe you from the Stipe and Cyril Gane fight. All that, they never back pay me. Now I have made
the pay accusations, saying Dana White owes him money, another thing that got Dana White essentially irate and he lost his damn mind. We'll play the clip in a moment. Let's finish here.
More money than I would have ever made in the UFC. I would say maybe twice the money that I could have ever made in my entire UFC career. Why is it so pissed about me not making that much money?
What he said is straight facts. Ngannou made more money in boxing than he could have ever made in MMA. Dana always harps on, oh, well, if he would have fought and beat John Jones, he would have got more than this. Is he going to make $20 million for an MMA fight? No, he isn't. No, he isn't. The UFC claims that he was guaranteed around $8 million, but if the pay-per-view buys were good, it would push him to make potentially $10 million if he would have fought against John Jones. But I think that's a lot of ifs, and I'm not so certain that those are absolute numbers. On top of that, you have in the potential for sponsorships, right? The UFC has a limited pool of sponsorships. They run the in-cage sponsorships and the fight week sponsorships. It has to be a UFC sponsor sponsoring you. It's not only the straight pay from the purse of the fight that he makes more in boxing, but it's also more money for sponsorship opportunities, taking on Tyson Fury in a massive fight. That made him millions. 20 million for the Fury and Joshua fight may have been more if you include sponsorships and all. I know for an absolute that Francis Ngannou has made more outside of the UFC than he would if he would have stuck around, because we've all known boxing pays more because the promoter simply gets less. It's fighter first. And granted, that is kind of a problem with why boxing has subpar matchmaking, right? But as far as for the fighter in boxing, you're definitely taken care of much better, more substantially. Now, in the UFC, Dana will always claim Francis would have made more, but his biggest payday ever in the UFC was $790,000 against Stipe. And the supposed number that's floated around through the internet for the Ciryl Gane fight is $600K. That's nothing compared to what he's made in boxing. Now let's jump to Dana White. Let's bring up angry Uncle Dana here as he reacts to a reporter from, I believe, MMA Junkie, pretty much just playing him the dialogue, or rather repeating the dialogue from what we just watched Francis Ngannou say, the clip from Francis. So let's play it.
Yeah, when have you ever heard a story in all the years we've been in business, even when it was upside down, where we owed somebody money? Never happened.
I can say that the UFC pays what they owe, but I don't see Francis Ngannou as a liar. Why is he just going to make that up? I'm sure there's been fighters that have been silent about it, and I'm sure that if there's anybody that didn't get some type of potential back pay compensation that was promised, it would have been an Ngannou who left the UFC to try and chase the dream of boxing and then signs with PFL. Granted, I can't prove this with evidence. It's all hearsay, right? Ngannou says they owe me money. Dana says, no way. It wouldn't shock me if words were that we'd pay him, and because he didn't end up re-signing, he never got that money. So to be fair, I think Ngannou has some merit in this situation, and I'm going to lean towards believing Francis personally, especially with how Dana White seems so emotional here. And you'll listen to the gaslighting in a moment.
So he's full of shit there. Then I lost. I didn't lose anything. I was done with Francis after the... He actually owes me money because we had to watch that fight with him and the Black Beast. He should actually pay me back for that fight.
Look at that. He's trying to push it till that fight sucked with the Black Beast. Dog, that's years ago. This is too far back. It's not even relevant. This is pre-championship Francis Ngannou. Yeah, the fight with Derek Lewis absolutely sucked. But that's also to blame not just Ngannou, but Derek Lewis. Like, you got to blame the both of them. Like, let's be real. It takes two to tango. You can't just say, oh, they both didn't show up that night. Besides all of that, Dana White stands on, oh, no, I didn't lose. And you could tell a little twitch in his eye that he got really angry when the I lost kind of got pushed on him. Like, he lost. He's like, I lose. I never lose. I'm Dana White. I'm undefeated, undisputed. And I think that the truth is he did lose, because the UFC lost the biggest heavyweight fight they could ever make, which is Francis Ngannou and Jon Jones. They lost. Simple as that. We are literally weeks away from Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Stipe is fighting for the belt. And oh wait, his most recent fight, he got knocked out by Francis Ngannou a few years ago, viciously. And yeah, he beat him earlier on in his career, but he got violently KO'd in the rematch. Like, let's not erase that because Stipe beat him once. And now Jon Jones is fighting against Stipe in an attempt for a legacy fight, which I can respect, but Tom Aspinall is surely the most deserving contender. And my gosh, UFC 309, that's a disgrace in its own. And I'll make a separate video talking about that card because I'm not liking it at all. I was looking at the card today and I'm like, this might be the worst Madison Square Garden card ever. I think it is, actually. And it's one of the worst pay-per-views of the year. But that's a separate video. Let's keep listening to Dana's anger.
And all of you. And me praying for it, trust me, I don't think about Francis that much. You guys asked me the question about the PFL, and I responded. Other than that, the only one who's praying for his demise is probably the PFL, because they signed a shitty contract with a guy that doesn't deliver any numbers and ticket sales or pay-per-views. So, and they got to keep paying this guy for however long. And good for him.
Okay, so do you guys remember leading up to UFC 270? The narrative that was floating around is the UFC was intentionally making that card worse to kind of discredit the value of Francis Ngannou in an attempt to leverage in contract negotiations? Because I remember it. Let's look at the card of UFC 270, the main event. Francis Ngannou versus Cyril Gane, which is a great fight. I mean, you know what? I would watch a damn rematch and I'd be excited to see it. And it was really close. And you know what? Cyril Gane almost beat Francis, but that's way besides the point. That's a great main event. That's a huge main event. That's a big main event in 2025, next year. Davison Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno. That's a really good flyweight fight. But let's be honest, flyweight division of all the men's divisions is probably the least popular. Not that I dislike it. I love flyweight, but it doesn't do great numbers, and that's just simply a fact. Michel Pereira versus Andre Fialho. This is the pre-Michel Pereira at 185 killing everybody, and it's Andre Fialho, who's not really well known as a casual name. He's a fun style, but this is not a marquee fight at 170. And that's the featured bout of the night on this main card. Said Nurmagomedov versus Cody Stamann. I mean, besides the Nurmagomedov name, Said's not that well known, and Cody Stamann doesn't have a massive fan base, and this wasn't like a high-stakes, top-caliber bantamweight fight. It was like teetering towards top 15 level. I don't even think Nurmagomedov was ranked at the time. I could be wrong. This is some years ago now. And it was Michael Morales and Trevin Giles to open up the main card. Yeah, Michael Morales is awesome, and he's become a contender now, but he was like new blood in the UFC. And Trevin Giles, I mean, he's been in there with decent names, but he's more of a gatekeeping journeyman. So this pay-per-view was by no means a mega card, okay? If you're talking about Ilia Topuria this weekend, oh, he's a star, look at his numbers. Yes, he's awesome, I love Topuria. But if you put Francis Ngannou in the main event of UFC 308 as opposed to Topuria, and you had Ngannou versus whoever, Tom Aspinall, or one of the better heavyweights right now, John Jones especially, but then you have a co-main event, which is Khamzat Chimaev, and then you have Ankalaev on the feature bout. Like I'm saying, you're still pulling in pretty damn good numbers because the pay-per-view is stacked. Shara Bullet on the main card, Lerone Murphy and Dan Ige, always fun fights with Ige. So of course, the narrative that was pushed towards Francis's final UFC fight is he can't sell. I think simply they put together a kind of subpar UFC pay-per-view in an attempt to destroy Francis Ngannou's pay-per-view sellability and use that to bring him back and sell him on a John Jones fight, which we all know would have done mega numbers. Ngannou versus Jones right now is huge. Ngannou versus Tom Aspinall right now is still huge. So you can't really push the BS out there without looking into the facts. The UFC did no favors to Ngannou with promotion, and they did not stack a card in his favor by any means. They could have added better fights to this card, and it could have got way more pay-per-view buys. Instead, they made it a little meh. They wanted it to be a little meh because they didn't want Francis Ngannou to have a million buy card to close out his UFC run because, damn, that's strong for negotiations. It's all a business. These are money moves, and I respect the UFC's tactics. They're intelligent tactics. I'm not saying that this isn't how business is done, but when you're talking about truth, Francis Ngannou is 1,000% sellable, and he had a large majority of fans interested in him fighting in PFL. They definitely were interested in the Tyson Fury fight. They definitely were interested in the Anthony Joshua fight. So what are you talking about? Major fights. And Ngannou is one of the biggest names in combat sport right now. So untrue. Let's keep playing it.
And not good for them.
Yeah, and I know
what was the other question?
It was. I know you said like he's all about the money, but then you also said like he would have made more money to stay here.
And that's a fact. He can play those games all he wants. He would have made more money here.
Bullshit. So Dana White is now pushing he'd make more money here, but he's all about money. Which one is it? Because if he's all about money and he would have made more money, Uncle Dana, he would have stuck with you guys. Come on now. I don't buy it. I don't think Francis Ngannou is all about money. And the UFC contract they offered him was not going to make him as much money as fighting Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua in boxing. 0% chance. Now, I'm sure he would have made a massive amount, and it would have been one of the biggest UFC contracts ever. I'm not sitting here and arguing that point, but it's either he's all about the money or he isn't. If you're saying he's all about the money, but you're saying you guys would have made him more money, then how can he be all about the money if he left the UFC? If he's all about the money, wouldn't he have went to PFL or boxing to make more? If he wasn't all about the money, he was all about legacy, wouldn't he then jump and fight John Jones for that fight? But you're saying, no, it's about the money. Like, which side are we on? I think Dana White kind of fumbled on this one, and that's why he deflects the question immediately to just drop in hate and drop in barbs, because there's not really a way he can answer this properly with it making much sense. Let's keep playing it.
And just lastly,
Let me tell you what. There were two guys here. I wanted to cut them. Someday I'll tell you the story. Francis was like, I was all about Francis in the beginning, and then I found out who Francis was. And I told the two guys who asked me not to cut Francis, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. And, yeah, believe me, I have no sleepless nights over Francis leaving.
so just two more things.
Okay, so interesting, right? Dana White talks about he was done with Francis following the Derek Lewis fight, but did he forget about this interview? Did he forget about this? Following his win over Stipe Miocic, UFC 260, Dana White was asked about a potential John Jones fight. And I'm sure most of you have seen this on MMA Twitter or on some other MMA video. And if you haven't, here's Dana White back when he was on the anabolics.
The money. What appeals to you most? Because it seems like that would be an amazing super fight.
If I'm John Jones and I'm home watching this fight, I start moving to 85.
If I'm John Jones and I'm home watching this fight, I start moving to 85. But now it's no, John Jones is the best. Francis is ducking him. I find it hard to believe. I know that you guys find it hard to believe too. There's too much evidence of Dana White being full of BS, dog. It's crap. It's untrue. He's just anti-Francis because he did lose the war with Francis Ngannou. And you can see the jacked up Dana White back when he looked like a damn supervillain. He said it himself. If I'm John Jones, I want to drop in weight. But now the narrative is no, Francis ducked John Jones. He was scared of Jones. I don't think so. Let's keep playing clips.
Things on this.
Yep.
You wanted to cut him, but he went on to become the UFC heavyweight champion. So I guess what does that say about that thought process?
Yeah.
Does it show he should have
Well,
stayed? Or?
no. I didn't like Francis as a person. Wasn't a guy I wanted to do business with. My boys were telling me he's misunderstood. And I told them, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Yeah, it wasn't about him becoming the heavyweight champion of the world. Francis isn't a good guy. He plays the good guy.
What? Francis isn't a good guy? That's not the vibe I got. Maybe he's tough to do business with. Maybe he's irritating in the damn war room going back and forth because he's stubborn. And maybe he demands a lot because he recognizes his value. But not a good guy is an absolute stretch. Now, I don't think Dana White's a horrible person, but we saw him slap his wife in public. Just to be straight up, like if we're going to talk about not a good guy, slapping your wife, especially in public, I mean, in closed doors, obviously bad look for sure, slapping them in general, but especially in public, we all know there's evidence maybe Dana isn't that great of a guy. Now, granted, his mother also said that he's not a good guy, but regardless of that fact, to be fair, we don't know the family drama. And sometimes, toxic families and shit, they're going to try to bash him. I'm not saying that's evidence, but this slap kind of is. He's definitely a questionable character. But here's Francis Ngannou. Oh, what's this? The Francis Ngannou Foundation. Look, this is Francis's foundation. Francis Ngannou Foundation. So he does charitable work with his name. Humble beginnings of Francis Ngannou. He comes from Cameroon. Look at him now. Look at him now. And they have all the accomplishments that they've done. Look at their work here. So he has a foundation, a charitable organization, which has built MMA gyms in different parts of Africa, giving, poor kids a chance to have recreation in sport and building African MMA. Innovating education, right? There's plenty of other things I can sit here and talk about. Look, just look. Helping with the damn COVID-19, food and all. Come on, man. Education, anti-malaria. Like, there's a lot of stuff that Francis Ngannou has done outside of fighting that I think earns him the title of good guy. And I think losing in the negotiation room with him and disagreeing about a career path for Francis Ngannou should not now cause you to bash him personally. I totally disagree with Dana White claiming Francis is not a good guy. That just seems untrue. And, it's kind of like the kettle calling the pot black. Dana White, we've seen some not so great things about him. But now Francis is a bad guy. As far as evidence from us, every fan at home and everybody who exists watching MMA and knows about MMA news and whatnot, have we ever really seen anything bad about Francis Ngannou? The only bad we've seen is coming from Dana's mouth. Not any evidence with our own eyes. There was one fighter a while back leading up to his fight against Alistair Overeem who said that, oh, Francis is cocky, I don't like him. But that's just hearsay. That's what somebody said about him. Some people don't get along. Doesn't make you a bad guy because X person didn't like you. Dana's lying. He's gaslighting. Let's play some more.
I don't understand the language, and, so he seems like he's a nice guy.
That was rude as fuck, man. Could potentially be considered racist by some. Like, come on. Francis Ngannou speaks good English. He put a lot of work into speak English, man. He speaks English. He speaks the native language. I believe the Cameroon language, Cameroonian. I'm 99% sure. Sorry if I'm wrong. French. Does he speak more? Maybe. And he speaks English. Come on. Don't bash the dude's English speaking skills, man. He's done well on podcasts.
He's not. And he's just not a guy that I wanted to be in business with.
Okay, he's not a guy you wanted to be on business with, but he's not a bad guy. Come on now, Dana. Now we're mixing the two. He's not a guy I want to do business with. No, he isn't, because he's hard to deal with in these negotiation rooms because he demands respect and he's stubborn. I agree with that. Probably a hard guy to do business with, but you can't say he's not a bad guy, or a good guy rather, because of it. You say he's a bad guy because of that? You're wrong.
Period. End of story. Whether he became the champion or not.
And I assume you don't want to be in business with him ever again, but...
We won't be. We'll never be in business together. You can tell.
Yeah.
We don't like each other. And this goes way back. This goes back to before the first Stipe fight. He pulled some shit before the first Stipe fight, and I said, I'm done with this guy, and then Stipe beat the shit out of him.
He had to throw in the Stipe beat the shit out of him. Let's not forget, he whooped him in the rematch, though.
Great night. And then, we never had a relationship after that.
Well, and
I just find that a little bit hard to believe, though, because Dana White was hyping him up big time following the Stipe win, saying Jones don't want to fight him. I don't know. Things are murky in the water with these two. They'll just never get along, and Dana White completely shutting down any chance of a crossover fight, which we already knew that wasn't going to happen. That was an absolute pipe dream. Can you imagine a world where we're doing PFL versus UFC? No, I can't. It won't happen. But I don't agree with Dana White. I don't agree with bashing Francis Ngannou personally when there's no evidence of him being anything but a good guy. On the opposite side, there is evidence. You can say he was hard to do business with. You can be angry at his decision to leave the UFC. But by no means are we going to say he's a bad man. That's weird. That's some gaslighting shit. Dana White was definitely off with this interview. I think it was emotional. You could tell he was very heated. It was full of gaslighting Ngannou. And I think a lot of what he said was simply untrue. I don't think the UFC could have gave him as much money as he's made outside of the UFC. And they know it. And Dana's upset about it. And they did lose the battle. Can you imagine a world where Tom Aspinall, Francis Ngannou, and John Jones are all fighting in the heavyweight division right now? That would be the best heavyweight division in the history of the sport, because all three are fucking phenomenal. But that's not the world that we live in, because they couldn't get the deal done because they didn't want to put him in boxing. Can you imagine a world where Dana said yes to allowing him to box Tyson Fury? He has that performance, then he comes back to MMA. His star power would have even been bigger, because a lot of us agree he was kind of robbed against Fury. But that's neither here nor there. This video was about this interview, reacting to Dana, and simply saying that I believe Dana White is wrong. And we got to stand against the damn hate towards Ngannou. He's done great things outside of the UFC. He's a legend of mixed martial arts. And I'll say, I believe, good man too. I hope you guys enjoyed this type of video. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and definitely smash the like button. And if you're new, subscribe. Are you team Ngannou or are you team Dana White? Let me know. I want to hear from the people. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Much love. Peace, everybody.